think we're ready to start. It's 6:30 here, and I want to be conscious of everybody's time. So good evening, GHS students and parents. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our annual college kickoff, facilitated by myself, Allison Lockridge, the College and Career Counselor here at Greenwich High School. I am so honored and excited to bring these three incredible presenters here with us tonight. As you can see from their experience, they have a depth of knowledge that I'm confident you'll all appreciate. And while the content of this evening is primarily for juniors and seniors, juniors and sophomores, those that are seniors and even freshmen will certainly find the discussion tonight helpful. So each of our presenters will take about 10 to 15 minutes on a topic. We have Rick Clark from Georgia Tech, who will kick off our evening with the topic of creating and shaping your college list, all while managing expectations and stress throughout the process. And then we have Eric DeAngelis from Brown University, who is also the president of NEACAC, which is the New England Association for College Admission Counseling. And Eric will provide some insight into standardized testing, which is a hot topic these days, and how test optional policies have changed the landscape of college admissions. And then finally, we have Claudia Marroquin, who is all the way in Los Angeles right now, but from Bowdoin College in Maine. But she will be discussing really important factors that are considered in the admissions process. We will have time at the end to facilitate some questions that many of you provided to me in advance of this evening. I will say the Q&A function is turned off tonight due to the size of the presentation. So thank you all for your attendance tonight, and thank you to our wonderful presenters in advance for taking an evening to spend time with us. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Rick.
All right. Well, thanks, Allison. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and it's good to see Eric and Claudia as well. So looking forward to the conversation and learning from colleagues as always. We don't have the chat function enabled or the Q&A tonight, so you're gonna have to just do some mental work for me here. We're gonna do a little word association. What I want you to think about, parents and also students, when you hear one word, what words come to mind? All right, so I'll give you a couple seconds. The word I want you to think about is college, okay? If you went to college, if you are thinking back on your own college experience, or as a high school student, when you think about college, and Claudia's helping us out, actually, we're all kind of helping you out with our virtual backgrounds here. What are some words that come to mind? I just want you to think, somebody says college, what comes to mind? So I've had the opportunity to ask this question in, I think now 32 different states and 5 different continents. Here are some of the words that you usually get. And this is often from those who have attended college, but you hear a lot of words like friends and learning and opportunity and research and opening doors, right? There's other words too, but those are some of the broad ideas of what you often hear. Excitement, energy, opportunity, right? All right, we're gonna add one word to this. I want you to kind of, again, just word associate for me. College admission. All right, now what words are coming to mind? Here again, if you are like folks, again, around the country and maybe around the world to an extent, you often hear now stress or money or anxiety or uncertainty or competitiveness. I mean, these are some of the words that often will come out, right? It's like, who popped the balloon? The energy of college, the excitement of opportunity, research, like learning, getting exposed to new ideas, friends, all just goes away when you add one extra word. And so tonight, whether you're a senior, or parent of a senior, or sophomore, junior, my challenge to you is that, and my belief, honestly, is that the college admission experience can actually be a lot more like the college experience if it is done right. That your job really is to be open-minded, the way you should walk into college. You should be excited, not intimidated or anxious, right? you should see that it is about relationships. And for families, there's a real opportunity here to learn about one another and to explore, as you do in college, through considering all the many opportunities that you have. So I don't know how many of y'all were on beforehand, but my picture and Eric's picture were originally switched on the first slide, and we were sort of joking a little bit about just, these two institutions are very different, and that's one of the great things about being able to have access as you do. And I know Allison was saying ahead of time, schools are coming to visit you, right? And you're getting the opportunity and access online in a way students before you really never have. I really want you to embrace that idea of this is an experience. It's not a process. We don't do you any favors. Admission people around the country do you no favors, nor do the press. Because when they write about college admission, it is almost always this phrase of college admission process. And when you Google process, do that now if you're bored and sick of hearing me talk, or do it later and just verify that I'm actually telling you the truth. But what you get is a lot of like very mechanical looking things, cogs in the wheel, formulas. It is very much an idea of like a recipe. There is a way to do this. And the idea also being, if you don't do it that way, if you don't go from one formula to the next, if there's something out of whack, then everything's going to go off the rails. My hope is that you will move your language a little bit to talking about this as an experience, because an experience helps you stay broad. It means that there's not really a way to a certain end result or an end place, but instead there's kind of an adventure and an excitement, again, college admission, right, of not knowing how it's all going to turn out and not trying to control that the way you would with a recipe or a process. So I do think that, as you start and as you think about this, my hope is you'll change your language a little bit, and think about college admission the way you think about college. Think about an experience instead of a process. And as you think about creating a college list and thinking about where you might apply, my hope is that you will kind of look beyond what you normally see. That you'll stay open-minded. And there's a couple ways I would challenge you to do that. One of them is by thinking about people you admire. Whether that be a CEO of a brand that you really think is cool, maybe it's a politician, maybe it's an athlete, maybe it's somebody that lives down the street from you or a teacher that you had. Find out where they went to college. And I think what you're going to start to create is breadth. You're going to start to kind of move beyond the normal kind of echo chamber that we're all in. And it's interesting to ask students, if you live in Boston, write down 10 schools. If you live in LA, write down 10 schools. You live in Chicago, write down 10 schools. Regionally, of course, some of those same schools are going to show up. And then you're going to have the usual suspects of what high school students usually think of as college. There's not a lot of creativity. There's not a lot of variance. And your job is to listen to people like Allison and your other counselors, to keep your eyes open and your mind open to all of this stuff. And here again, on behalf of admission officers everywhere, I just want to apologize for what we send you in the mail, because here we're really not helping you much, right? This stuff comes in and it really does all look the same. I mean, Atlanta can make its trees look like Maine if we really want to. We can Photoshop stuff. But you get the things in the mail. You put your hand over the title of that school and they do all really blur together, right? It's pretty predictable. Like page 2, football team is winning. You're not taking pictures when you're getting hammered like 65 to nothing. No, you're going to take that picture of your running back kind of triumphantly going towards the touchdown when you're winning. Page 3, some kid is in Spain, standing up on something high, looking out over the ocean, imagining life's possibilities, wearing the hoodie of the school, right? Page 4, 3 kids of different ethnicities under a tree, happy and always studying outside, kind of close enough to the professor to note that that person cares without being too close to where it's a little weird or creepy. And so we're not helping you because we all start to look the same in the stuff we send. So here again, your job is to really ask these questions around, they can't all be the same. There's 4,000 plus schools in this country. Like, what makes them different and what do I care about? And here's one thing I'd like to do, and that is flip the script on COVID a little bit. I think it would be easy, and I have kids of my own, to say as a high school student, man, this really is not how I would have ever predicted it to go or projected or wanted it to go, right? Kind of feeling like you got gypped a little bit with your high school experience. And I get that, right? And that's not crazy. At the same time, you do have some benefits and some opportunities that students before you don't, and I don't want you to miss those. So here is one of those. As you're thinking about where you might apply, as you're thinking about ultimately where you might choose to go, right? Because right now, especially if you're a senior, some of this is where all am I going to apply? And will I get in, and all the stress and concern that might go along with that. 4 or 5 months from now, your big concern and stress is like, oh my gosh, I have 3 or 4 choices. Like, where am I going to go now? And that's like a whole different equation, right? What I hope that you'll do is think about this. What was canceled or disrupted during the pandemic that you really missed? Because if you can think about the stuff that was taken away from you that you cared about, that's what you value. Maybe it was a particular activity, maybe it was a particular class, maybe it was a particular relationship. Whatever those things were that were off, whatever those things were that were not able to happen and canceled, that's what you value, that's what you care about. And when you're looking at schools and thinking about where you might want to go, lean into schools that are doing that well, that put emphasis and value on those things. And just a very good example, I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. Both were doing Taekwondo before the pandemic, right? So pandemic hits, Taekwondo is canceled. My son is devastated, just absolutely devastated, getting online, trying to look at YouTube and stay up with his skills because he wanted to test for a black belt. Meanwhile, our daughter literally dancing in the hallway, like so happy that Taekwondo was canceled, so happy it was off. And recently, the dojo went out of business. They turned it into an art studio, and we drove by recently, and she's like, man, talk about an upgrade. She's like so excited that this is no longer going to have to go back. So what was that for you? What were those things that were off that you care about? Like, lean into schools that put value on the things that you care about, or the type of relationships and people that you care about. And then the last thing, and I'll hand it over to my colleagues, but you're going to hear a lot from your counselors about this concept of building a balanced list, right? Of being able to think and consider all these various places that you're going to apply. And, what I would hope is that in addition to that, selectivity wise, you'll be able to identify schools that have a range of admit rates, a range of profiles that you'll, be able to give yourself some good opportunities when this is over, but also financially. I think the pandemic here again has shed some good light on having Americans ask good questions around the value, the return on investment, what degrees are worth and what you're paying for those degrees. And so as parents and as students, I hope that you'll build a good financially balanced list as well, and have just honest conversations now about that, whether you are a senior or a junior, before you ever submit an application, that you'll have a really honest conversation, and parents being comfortable with giving limitations and conditions around money. Not to say you can't apply, but just saying simply, if it doesn't come out at X or below, once all finances are on the table, like, we're not going to be able to do that. I mean, all of us have been in a situation, Allison, Eric, Claudia, and myself have been in a situation where it's April, the student's been admitted, bought the hoodie, posted on Instagram, and mom is literally like blowing her nose into the financial aid letter because it's not affordable. It's not something that's going to, work for the family. But those honest conversations about money early. And I think we undersell or shortchange our students a little bit with what they can handle in terms of the maturity of walking through finances and saying, either we can't afford X or above, or we're not willing to pay that. And that's okay. It's okay, because if you come behind that and say, because I don't want to work till I'm 78, or because we don't want to not be able to go on vacations, like, you'll find that students can handle that and are going to be willing to have that conversation and kind of use that as they apply to colleges. So I'll hand it over to our next presenter, but again, looking forward to your questions. Thanks so much for the opportunity, and we'll see you at the end of the program.
Allison, you just want me to jump in? Excellent. All right. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Eric DeAngelis from Brown University. I've been given the joyous topic of standardized testing to talk to you about. It is the biggest hot topic right now. I just want to harp on something Rick just said a couple minutes ago. And when I got my first job working in college admission, my office was next to somebody that had been doing this for a very long time. And she said that one of the pieces of advice she gave, and she was also a school counselor before she worked in admission as well. And she said, college is just as much an economic choice as it is a personal preference. And there are cost estimators that are now out there on many of our websites. And you can do that tonight. You can start looking through and determining what possible packages could look like from different schools immediately. And I find that it helps set those expectations and makes those conversations a little bit easier with your student, and also not being afraid to have a little bit of transparency with your student about the financial situation, just because it is so intertwined with each other. But that was just a quote that has stuck with me for 18 years at this point. So back to the fun stuff, SATs and ACTs and everything in between. This is such a hot, almost controversial topic, but something that people forget is that this is not the first time we have been in a test optional environment. We have the pioneer of test optional in the room tonight. Bowdoin College was the first to do this. Hundreds and hundreds of colleges pre-COVID were test optional. The only difference is that nearly every other college in the school went test optional. And most importantly, Rick was saying this before, there are those 25 schools that everybody knows about. And when they went test optional, that's really when it felt like a seismic shift in the landscape, because there was the avalanche of applications, well, how are they going to do this now? And so what I hope to do is to be able to bring you through a couple of the steps. Allison gave me some prompts of things that you are most interested in when it comes to standardized testing. So I hope to be able to give you a little bit of give you some ease and lessen your anxiety about the standardized testing. So not only were hundreds and hundreds of other schools test optional previous to this, this, for at least us at Brown, we required tests pre-COVID, and then we had this past year as test optional. This was not as difficult as I thought it would be. Because at first I'm thinking, how are we going to do this? How are we going to differentiate very high achieving students from one another? And it took maybe 10 to 20 applications when I first started off to get used to not seeing testing in most of them. And then I realized that it really truly allowed me to focus much more on the day-to-day work of the student and on that holistic approach to evaluation. And holistic is one of those buzzwords that you're going to hear so much in this process ad nauseum. Just a reminder, it really means that all the components are taken into account. Claudia is going to go much more deeper into those components, so I won't really mention any of those here. But you have to remember that testing always was and continues to be just one of many factors that are used when making admission decisions. It's never been a singular component that we use to determine the direction of where a student goes in our application process. And so there are many ways a student is showcased beyond just one sitting of a test, in addition to the transcript, like the other pieces, the rec letters, the writing, other opportunities that schools will be able to give you to showcase yourself. And I can confidently say in our process, one of my biggest anxieties going into test optional at Brown, and I said this at a staff meeting the day that we started early decision reading, is I said, I don't want anyone to start conjecturing or making up stories as to why some student has a test and another student doesn't, especially if they're in the same school. Because one would surmise, well, if they went to the same school, they'd probably have the same access. Not true. COVID completely flipped the script on anything. And I was really, really happy to see that not once in our committee rooms, in our deliberations, did we sit there and say, they probably have a test and we just don't know about it. It didn't happen. We really were trying to give as much grace and flexibility to students and live up to our word of saying that we were test optional. Many colleges in the nation signed a pledge through our national parent organization. It's called the National Association for College Admission Counseling. And we signed and published on their website a pledge that we would truly be a test optional environment, as we said we would, and it would be in our practice as well. So we put it out there. One thing that we did, a lot of us experience, were, again, the avalanche of applications now that test optional was an option at many schools that weren't before. So do we expect to see another banner year of being most competitive years, our highest application numbers ever, you know, those headlines? We don't know. It could be. I personally hope that we go back to where we were before in terms of volume, because we all got many, many, many more applications, but guess what? We didn't get any more staff to do that with, okay? We were still, as a group of 20 people, trying to plow through 45,000 applications, and we did it well and thoughtfully, but these are new glasses, just to give you a sense of how this affected us. It's really too early to tell what that volume is going to be like. The rumblings out there in the world right now, and Claudia and Rick can like thumbs up or thumbs down on this, is that it feels like most places will either be even or a little bit lower than they were last year. At least that's where I'm seeing things trend, and that's what I'm hearing from my colleagues as well. Another thing that you are all asking about is, do we anticipate colleges going back to requiring the SAT or the ACT? Again, I think that's too early to tell, but there are some schools that have blatantly flat out said, yes, we will be going back to requiring, starting whenever that might be. I imagine that they will re-implement that once we feel that COVID is far enough in the rearview mirror that the access isn't going to be as much of an issue. Will everyone go back to requiring? No. I think that there were a lot of schools, and this isn't an official statement from Brown or anybody else, but I think there are a lot of schools that were holding tight to the standardized testing before that now can see that we were able to do it well, and also diversify our pools and our first year classes without them. And that's pretty compelling information. We are now seeing that there are research groups cropping up at different universities talking about, well, how are those students doing even though we didn't see what their standardized testing was? And I think that you might see some kind of shift in the future. Every school is going to be different. This is also not up to us. It's not up to Rick, Claudia, or myself if our institutions go test optional permanently. Well, Claudia is, but we have to report up to presidents, corporations, trustees, faculty are a huge part of that decision as well. This is really a structural and institutional decision. So it's really out of our hands. We can make recommendations and supply the data, but ultimately that comes down somewhere else. So if you're not sitting for an SAT or an ACT, or you're choosing not to send those scores, even though you might have them, are AP scores now more important? I don't think so. This is also going to vary based upon the college that you ask. So from my perspective in my office, we just use them as placement for students when they get to the university. Others are going to use it to predict how many credits they're going to bring in. Others require that you submit that as part of your application because they will use that in a metric to determine your academic qualifications. So it will be different at every school that you are looking at. Just remember that if you report an AP score in your Common App, anyone that you send the Common App to will see that. Okay, so if you don't want everyone seeing those scores, you have to determine an alternative way to have those sent on in. Okay, but I think that we are still much more concerned about how you performed collectively in that course and what your final grade was in the course over what that score will be at the end of the day. So I don't think that there's additional importance on it. Again, because testing has always just been one of many, many factors. You're a senior. You're sitting there and you're saying, okay, so do I submit my scores? How do I know if I should send them? I wish that there was like an app on your phone that you could put that information into and it would spit out a yes or no recommendation. there isn't. And I would actually love to hear my colleagues' perspective on this as to how they've advised students before. So it's relatively new for me to advise students on this. And it's the most common question I've gotten this year. And there's no perfect answer, and every different institution will tell you a different thing. But same goes for SATs or ACT as AP. You self-report on Common App, everybody sees it. So just be sure that you are including or not including certain types of information on the Common Application if you don't want everybody to see it. Utilize the resources that your school has, such as, I'm not sure if you utilize Naviance or Score at your school, or any other way for you to look historically at students that applied to certain schools, what their scores in GPA were, and what those decisions were. That can give you a little bit of a data indication. Also, many of us publish on our websites the average ranges or the midpoints for admitted students. And so I've personally been telling students, if your scores are above or like even at the midpoint of what those published ranges are, typically it's not something that's going to hurt you in the process. Towards the lower end and below, it's hard to tell because, again, it's one of many factors. All right. The decision, I think, really should be made in conjunction with your school counselor. Your school counselors are the ones that have been working with previous classes on applications, going to test optional schools for years before this as well. And that is something that you should work with them on. This is not meant to trick you. It's not meant to make you go insane. It's really just a choice. I can confidently say that we have many students in our freshman class at Brown that didn't have test scores as part of their application, and we feel really confident that they're going to do well. Just a couple of other last things. You're a sophomore or you're a junior. How much time should you put into test prep? So my best advice is maybe just prepare as you normally would, knowing that every college, by the time you get to senior year, is still not going to be test optional. I would much rather see you in a position to prep and take the test and then find out you don't actually need to do it, versus trying to scramble at the end. I apologize if you hear a very loud squeaky toy in the background. I have a 10-week-old puppy that is being played with and entertained in the other room while I give this webinar to you tonight. So wrapping up, overall, I do predict the standardized testing landscape is going to change forever. And many places who previously required the testing are going to ease them in perpetuity. You might hear that sooner than later from a lot of places. And lastly, a common trap that I see students do is spend more than 50% of their time dedicated to obsessing over the test. You have so many more things to worry about, from your supplemental writing to your interviews, to videos, to portfolios, to demonstrating your interest, to your quality of writing, to doing well in senior year, because we all want to see senior grades. There's so many other things that we want you to concentrate on. This shouldn't be the thing that takes up the far majority of your time. So I may have given you more panic and anxiety. I don't know. But that is what the landscape looks like from my perspective and my end right now. But just also know you are in a school that has great counseling and resources. They will guide you appropriately when it comes to this type of decision.
Thank you, Eric. And I was just wondering, Claudia, if maybe you could comment or just kind of add to Eric's comment on seniors and asking the question, because we're getting that on a daily basis about, do I submit scores, and kind of what you would say, and Rick, what you might say.
Yeah, I think it's always going to depend on the institution. And Eric actually gave the answer that I've given to students for years, where you have to use the data that's available to you to try to make as best of an informed decision as you can. When you look at the profiles that colleges publish, the one that we have been using for the last number of years, since we've been test optional for over 50 years, is the testing for students who submitted their scores. So you can see again the scores that we were able to see through the admissions process. And as Eric said, if it falls within those ranges, it looks like everyone else's scores. So it's going to, again, just be commonplace at that point. But I would always tell students to think about the context and the environments that they've grown up in. Because when I get into talking about how all of the other parts of the application factor in, that's going to be evaluated as well. So what do some of those additional contexts look like? Are you first generation to college? Are you a lower income student. There are studies that show who performs better on the SAT. And some of that is factored in by socioeconomic class. The other thing that I always tell students is look at your test scores in relation to the rest of your application. Colleges do not admit test scores. If you have amazing test scores and you haven't challenged yourself in high school, the scores don't tell us much about what you're actually going to be able to do on our campus. So there has to always be a connection between the testing and then what you've actually been doing in and outside of the classroom. And then there's the piece that's also personal. I submitted my test scores to Bowdoin. I'm a graduate of the college. Were they in those middle 50%? Not necessarily, but I was actually really proud of the scores that I had received. And there's a part of this decision-making process where the entire application you're putting together is you putting your best foot forward. And you have to stand behind the statements you're making on the essays, but also in the choices of whether you're going to submit your test scores or not. And part of that is, do I feel proud? And do I feel like it actually represents the academic work that I know I am capable of? And that is going to be a very individual decision that you're going to have to make in conjunction with your counselors who know the institutions and know your work, academic work as well.
Rick, did you have anything to add to that?
You know, and I think that is a very, very well said. My mind works in metaphors. And so just to kind of, maybe this is helpful to some students out there, like along with what Claudia said, I think about an application in some ways as just like a stool, right? There's a top to that stool. And then some colleges are going to dictate like, what are those pegs of the stool that they're going to evaluate? And some places are going to say, hey, it's really just going to be your GPA and the courses that you took. They're going to make very formulaic, quantitative decisions. But these three schools and a lot of schools like us are all going to start talking about holistic, meaning they're adding pegs to that stool. And that could be your essay, that could be your recommendation letters, that could be your interview, that could be testing. And I think along with what Claudia said, that's sort of the way I would approach it, is to say, as I think about what do I want strength and what do I want support of my overall application, is testing one of the legs that I want to have hold this up? Or do I feel like I maybe have that covered? But I think both Erica and Claudia really hit the nail on the head in terms of using those profiles, using previous data to ultimately make that decision.
Great, thanks, Rick. I'll turn it over to you, Claudia.
Yeah, so I'll try to tie in all of these items that we've been talking about. And I want everyone to keep in mind what Rick said earlier about values, because that's going to come up quite a bit in the way that you should be thinking about how you present yourself to colleges. So I know in this past year, many of my colleagues who were newly test optional were getting the question, well, if you don't have test scores, what are you going to evaluate and make your decisions on? There's a lot in the application that people make decisions on. So one of the very first things colleges will look like in this holistic admissions process are going to be transcripts. The work you've done over the course of your 4 years in high school matters tremendously as an indicator of the potential that you have once you transition to college. The one thing I will say is we read within context. We know that high schools are not created equal and don't offer the same things. So we're going to look at what your high school has offered you, what sorts of rigor has been available, if there have been limitations to the AP courses, the honors courses, when you might have even entered that high school, to determine what has been available to you and how you've chosen to navigate that environment. So we take a very close look at your setting to then understand what we're seeing presented on the transcript. You're going to hear many college officers always talk about the trends that we're going to notice over the course of your 4 years. We're looking to see that you've taken your core academic classes and that hopefully you're doing better each year. Because again, you're building the blocks so that you are getting better prepared to enter college. In this last year with the pandemic, we know many high schools may have switched to pass-fail, may have given students the option of pass-fail grades. because everything was disrupted and virtual learning took place. So what are colleges doing in terms of that? We're offering grace and flexibility. That's what our schools did as well. We shifted to online learning. We gave students pass-fail grades. So we're understanding the context that you're experiencing in your high school. But for the most part, again, we're going to dig deep into the transcript. And for those of you who choose not to submit test scores, this is going to be the part of your application that's going to be one of those pegs that Rick noted that's going to support the question of, can you do the academic work at our institution? Because we're going to base our decision on the courses you've taken and how you've chosen to challenge yourself. The other piece that's going to be a pretty strong indicator of can you do the work will be the essays that you write. I always talk about essays in two ways. One way is it's sharing more about your academic ability. How can you write? Is the grammar structure correct? How are you storytelling? That tells us a lot about your capability to then land in our classrooms where you may be expected to write long research papers and to really articulate your thoughts. The other part of the essay that is incredibly important is what you're choosing to share about yourself. And this is where what Rick mentioned about values comes into play. I think students sometimes believe that there's one right topic that they need to choose, that there is some magic thing that admissions officers are looking for. And Rick, Eric, and I have read thousands and thousands of essays. I can tell you that in the age group that you are when you're applying to college, 16, 17, 18, you'll have a lot of shared experiences. It's pretty hard to find something that's so unique that no one has written about it before. But what does stand out to us is how you're synthesizing the information, how you're really internalizing and seeing yourself in this large and complicated world that we're living in. And that's through the thing that you choose to share with us. You don't have to write an entire autobiography. You have 650 words to try to get at something that matters to you. So be concise. And I always recommend that students share something from the heart. Again, you never know who's going to be reading your application. And you want to be able to stand behind the thoughts that you have shared. So be authentic. You're going to hear that word a lot. I know it can become really cliche, but at the end of the day, again, the application is you in a nutshell. So write something that you feel is authentic to you, and that's something that you value and that represents you. The other parts of the application are equally important. So activities lists. Students are going to be engaged outside of the classroom once they get into college. We want to see that you have interests beyond studying. And often we're looking for what Rick mentioned. What have you valued? What is it that you really enjoy doing? There's no right answer to that. Sometimes students will ask well, should I be doing community service? Is that valued? What about athletics? It is all going to depend on the way that you, again, have found value in things. And we're not going to rate one activity higher than the other. Some students may not be able to participate in sports because they have family responsibilities after school. Some students may work. Those are all things that we're going to evaluate. So I always tell students, rather than think about your activities as the things you're doing in your high school, think much broader. When you're not doing homework and in class, how are you spending your time? And that can really expand the scope of the way that you've chosen to engage over the course of your 4 years. Again, with the pandemic, we know that a lot of things were ripped from underneath us. So we recognize that, but when you had that choice to make of, I can't do Taekwondo anymore, or there are no sports or orchestras that are taking place, what did you choose to spend your time on? That reveals a lot about yourself, what you value, and hopefully what you're starting to pick up too is that the application isn't just about getting a trophy at the end of the day, and the trophy being the college that you're attending, but you should be learning something about yourself and having this moment to reflect. I think the pandemic has forced us all to reflect, and you should use this opportunity to really share those thoughts in your application. Letters of recommendation are going to vary by institutions. The rule of thumb is that you'll normally be submitting one counselor recommendation So get to know your counselor and make sure that they are understanding the way that you've navigated your 4 years. And then typically 2 teacher recommendations. The rule of thumb is that they should be teachers from your junior or senior year who've taught you in the core academic disciplines. But again, it may depend on the institution where you might be able to, if you're an artist, send a letter of recommendation from an art teacher. At Bowdoin last year, we ended up allowing students for their second recommendation to choose anyone who they consider a part of their community. That could be a coach, that could be a pastor, it could be a supervisor at work, someone who has seen you interact with others. What type of community member are you? And how do you then express your opinions and your ideas with your friends inside and outside of the classroom? So think about your application as chapters to a book. And this is the chapter where others are going to speak on your behalf. Most people who write recommendations are going to say really wonderful things about you, but think about the wonderful things that may not already have been covered in the application. And finally, one of the other questions that we often get is my interest in a college tracked? Do colleges know how many times I have been on their websites? Should I be emailing the admission officer daily? That answer is an easy no. You should not unless you truly have some important questions that you need answered. But demonstrated interest is going to be different at every institution. For the most part, colleges are tracking what we send, if emails are being opened, because we also want to know what's working, what's landing. Are the pieces of information that we're sharing actually valuable to students? But at some institutions, whether you have visited, how often you have opened up an email, that will not factor into our decision-making. It's more of an opportunity for you to make sure that you're informed, that you know the type of institution that you're applying to, and that you could hopefully see yourself at that place. The entire process, as Rick noted, and the experience of applying to colleges is about trying to make a match and find an institution that's going to support you, is going to challenge you, and that hopefully you'll be able to see yourself as a part of that community forever. It's not just for 4 years, but it's even after you've graduated. So trying to engage with, yes, admissions officers, but if there's the opportunity to have an interview with an alum and get to pick their brain about how they navigated the experience at that institution and what they've been able to do afterwards, that's all helpful information for you to then recognize if that institution is going to be a good one for you. So contact us when you have questions that really cannot be answered elsewhere. If you've already done your research on the website and maybe you have very specific questions about an academic department and aren't sure which faculty member to reach out to, send an email to your admissions officer and we can really facilitate that communication. So be in touch with us, but recognize that this entire application should be a way for you to share the things that matter in your daily life and also what you aspire to do once you get onto our colleges, and recognize that we're humans who are also reading the application, and you will not be able to predict every single piece of how we're going to react, because this is not a formula. This is an experience of being able to pick up on all of the things that you've shared and to try to make the best decision for our community and for you as well. So I'm going to end there. And Allison, not sure if there are questions that weren't addressed necessarily by the three of us yet.
I was just going to say, you all did a fabulous job at answering many of the questions already. But Claudia, you touched upon this in terms of your role as an admissions counselor, but maybe if Rick or Eric could also comment. The question was, how can admissions counselors at colleges be used as resources for students as they're going through the admissions process?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to chime in on that. Really, I mean, there's a variety of ways, and it does a bit depend on the particular institution, for sure. But I'd say, generally speaking, we are the hub of the wheel in a lot of ways. We are generalists. We know a little bit about a lot of things happening on our particular colleges and institutions, and we like to connect students too. So use us in that way, I think, where, as was already said, I mean, you should be doing your homework and doing your research, of course. But, we'll often get emails from students saying, hey, I'm coming to the regular information session or to the tour, but is it possible for me to connect with somebody in the biology department? Or I looked into this, but I wasn't really clear exactly what's happening with some of your support for students who have learning differences. That's where a admission officer can often be a really helpful resource to students as they're researching the university. And that's certainly not just true at the prospective stage. It's absolutely true once a student's admitted or also confirmed and deposited and planning to come. Like, we want to be used in that way and help students to get the answers that they need.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with Rick that we're really the people that can help get you out, distribute you to the rest of the community. Knowing a little about a lot is absolutely true. I did a virtual school visit earlier in the day where somebody asked me about the research opportunities in the Sheridan Center for Learning. And I'm sitting there saying, we have a Sheridan Center for Teacher. Oh, okay, great. So I quickly am Googling this on the side and was able to find the person that was able to connect them. So as long as you set your expectations that we really are the experts on the application, the process, and I'm sorry, Rick, I used the word process, and financial aid, we definitely are the ones that you can use and abuse for that information. When it comes to a lot of the other stuff, it will depend on the admission officer. I don't know as much about athletics at Brown, but I could tell you all about, the STEM departments, for instance. And also, I don't want this to sound like a cop-out answer, but everything is online and the best information you can find is online and on the websites, and better than a lot of the things that we can sometimes say, especially if you're just looking for general information. So please don't be afraid to use that as a resource. We can certainly help with stories associated with those questions, but factual information, it sounds like a cop-out, but it's all right there at your fingertips.
Allison, sorry, can I just interject one thing? One thing that Eric just said that reminded me of something I wanted to comment on about, as you're thinking about maybe schools that you're going to apply to and kind of building that list, and then down the funnel a little further, like maybe you get into a school or three and you're trying to figure out which one to go to. Another thing that's great online that I think is underutilized by students are A, student newspapers, and B, alumni magazines, because those two resources are available to students, and they, again, we market the heck out of stuff, right? I mean, we're going to always kind of glossy, shiny you to death a little bit with making things look perfect at our particular institutions. But if you look at the alumni magazines, if you look at the student newspapers, you're going to get a real sense of culture and kind of, they're not marketing, they're just talking to each other. And so I think that is in a lot of ways like a good way for students to differentiate schools and to figure out if what they're putting priority on, time on, money into resonates and is something they want to be part of, as Claudia said, not just maybe in that 4-year period, but for 40 years.
Something my cousin did, she just graduated from college last year, but what she did in her process, she started following the Instagram accounts that were associated with the university, but were not university sponsored. So like different clubs and organizations that were like, our Office of University Communications was not building and monitoring, so it wasn't glossy. It was actual real things, and she would find hashtags and follow those students as well on social media, which I thought was brilliant, but apparently is very common. So for her, that was really, really instrumental in her being able to get a really unfiltered glimpse about the great and the ugly of any kind of school.
That's excellent advice. So I think one of the things we haven't really talked about tonight is the big topic of early decision, which, if you're a freshman or sophomore and you haven't heard the term early decision, that is a binding agreement, and, that some students can choose if they have that like top choice school or first choice school. So the question is, so colleges seem to be accepting more students than ever through early decision. How important is it for students to consider ED? And can students apply for financial aid and still be able to apply early decision. Who wants to take that one?
I'll
Oh,
jump
you
in really quickly first. And so Bowdoin has 2 rounds of early decision. And what I always tell students is, you are committing and letting us know that we are your top choice. And I say top because Bowdoin, while as wonderful of an institution as it is, it has a lot of similarities to other small liberal arts colleges. And you have to have done your research to figure out if we're the one, or if you could be happy at a number of different institutions. So I think there are a lot of anxieties around early decision. Students feel like it is going to be their best shot at getting into a college, and it very much isn't. Our early application pools are self-selecting. One thing to keep in mind is that the metrics, the rubrics we use are going to be the same in early as they are later on in regular decision. So it's not easier. It is students who have intentionally done all of the work, even sooner than their peers, to put the best application possible together. At Bowdoin, about half of our students, or half of an incoming class, are admitted through our 2 rounds of early. I recognize that sounds like a lot, but the thing to keep in mind is that in our regular decision round, we're admitting more students than we did combined in our early rounds. So there are still seats available. And again, we're going to make the same types of choices that we did in ED as we did in regular. When it comes to financial aid, that is, again, a very practical thing that you have to keep in mind. One thing that I always share with students, and Eric mentioned the net price calculators earlier, is if you are thinking of doing early decision to any institution, it behooves you to have also completed the net price calculator ahead of time, so that, again, you are making an informed decision. At my institution, when we admit a student in early, we actually also provide them with their financial aid offer at the exact same time, provided that the student has completed the financial aid application. So it should come as no surprise. They have the information to then be able to follow up with us and to be super excited a month after they've submitted their early application. So one thing that I do tell students is the benefit of having applied early is, and if you get in, is that you're done early. You can go and then enjoy the rest of your senior year and be done with thinking about your college list and fretting about what choice you're going to make. But recognize that you shouldn't be just throwing in an early to a place if you haven't done the research, because this entire year, your choices or the way that you think you may want to engage in college can also shift. So if you're a person who keeps going back and forth, take your time with this choice and this decision rather than just trying to be done and have it be out of the way.
I would say everything Claudia has said is 1,000% absolutely true. The only thing I would add on to that is, yes, you're done early, but it doesn't mean that you can let your foot off the gas pedal academically for the rest of your senior year. So I think people think that we're lying when we say that we look at, so at Brown, if you're admitted to early decision, we still want to see your mid-year grades, so you're going to get admitted in the middle of December, your mid-year grades come out sometime in January. We're still going to request those to see that you're keeping up on top of things. And then your final transcript goes out to every college once you've graduated. And if there is a severe enough dip in your performance, so if your performance, how you ended, is much different than the terms under which you were admitted, there can be a problem. That problem can sometimes be anything from very mild to severe. This is probably the most unenjoyable task I have in my job every summer. Mild, it can be anything from, please send us a letter explaining what had happened, or if there were any circumstances at play that could have informed why maybe your performance was different than before. All the way to the severe, which means that we cannot allow you to come to the college in like 2 months. We inevitably have to do that to maybe 2 to 5 students every single year. It is the worst thing to do because they have no options. They probably have a plane ticket bought, they have plans, but it was such a severe drop in performance. And so it's not to scare you, it's just to plant the seed that if you are admitted during an early round, that does not give you the clearance to, and I harp on this because a lot of school counselors I work with say that, people don't believe them that this actually can happen, and it can happen. For the most part, none of you will ever have to worry about that. However, it's just something to always keep in mind that how you finish is just as important as how you presented yourself when you first applied.
Allison, can I jump in with one thing?
Yeah, that'd be great.
We don't have early decision. I like to say we don't have an ED problem, but that's a admission joke. Anyway, one thing I would like to say, just flipping the script a little bit, again, here for students, there's a lot of talk about highly selective colleges, but I think students actually are the most highly selective in this entire dynamic, right? Because if there's 4,000 schools in the country and you apply to 7 or 10, and you've eliminated 99% of the colleges, 99 point something percent of the colleges and universities out there. And so, especially if you're a senior, this year, and you're coming up with this list of schools to apply to, I just want people to agree tonight, and I can't see people's faces and can't have you chat to say, yes, I agree, but that wherever you get in and whenever you get into any of the schools you've applied to, that you will celebrate that opportunity. Whether that be your quote first choice, if that's an ED, plan that you apply under, absolutely, of course. But certainly also for those students who are not applying under that binding agreement and they're applying to multiple places. I think too often students I hear students, I know you do as well, Allison, hear students say, yeah, I got in, but it was just the University of X or something, right? Like, you applied to that place and you were the one that submitted an application and you ruled out all these other places. So unless you are going through an ED plan, I hope that you'll sort of also eliminate that idea of saying this is my first choice or this is my top choice, and have this concept that every place you're applying to is your first and top, right? And that you'll treat it that way when you're given that opportunity. I think something like 7% of the world's population ever even steps foot on a college campus, let alone earns a degree from a college or university. So being given that opportunity is something you should go out to dinner. You should, buy something. You should celebrate that. And as a family, do that and commit to doing that for every admit that you receive.
I love that. I think we have time for one more question. There were several people that were that had questions on choosing a major when applying to college. So are certain majors more competitive than others? Is it best to apply to a less selective major and then change once I'm admitted? So if maybe one or two of you could speak to that, that would be great.
I can jump in. So I've worked at 3 different institutions. I worked at a large public flagship, I worked at a small Catholic institution, and now I work where I work today. And that is going to largely depend upon the individual institution. So I went to and worked at the University of Rhode Island way back. And you had to select which majors or college that you were applying to right away. And once you were admitted into that, it was really up to the discretion of the faculty if you could change your mind. So it made changing your major at the time a little bit more difficult if you wanted to go into like nursing or engineering. But if you wanted to switch from a humanities to a social science, that was no problem whatsoever. And so things like those pre-professional programs, like a nursing, pharmacy, engineering, any kind of formalized program that puts you on a track to a medical program, that can sometimes be a little bit more difficult, and they do want you to apply outright. Then you have colleges that it doesn't matter. Like at Brown, you just put the 2 things you're interested in right now, and you have the first 2 years to figure it out and then make a decision afterwards. So it's largely dependent upon the institutions that you're applying for. And there's a little bit of a strategy there too. It's like, do I apply for a more competitive program, possibly not get in, or do I apply for a program that, isn't as competitive, maybe I won't be so happy, but I have a better chance of getting into the college. And a lot of times, depending upon the school, you can't internally transfer. Like if you're looking at nursing, you need to apply straight outright. It's going to be very, very difficult for you to try to get in otherwise. So our favorite answer in college admission, it depends.
Sorry about that. I think that about sums it up, and I promised our presenters we would have a hard stop at 7:30 because you all have families to get to. Claudia, I know you have your full day in LA to get to. So I just really, again, wanted to thank you all. You were wonderful this evening and just such a valuable resource for all of our families that signed on tonight, and that I'm sure we'll listen to as well. So have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the school year and take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.